right, if you found your spot in 1 Samuel 25, we're going to start reading in verse 36. I ask you to go ahead and stand with me if you're willing and able to do that. I'm just going to read 3 verses right now. It says in verse 36, "And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of the king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, and he died." Or that he died. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, thank you again for the blessing to be in your house tonight. We pray that you bless the preaching of your word. We pray that you speak to hearts. And we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. And you may be seated. So, when we last were in the series, I guess, which would have been last Wednesday, we were basically back in verse 24. And so, since you came here. All right, is that better? Okay, so we were in chapter 24. So we've skipped ahead a little bit here, but we're going to kind of cover what was going on as we go through this. But first I want to actually talk about all that's going on in this passage of chapter 25, where we started reading, and then we'll see how it kind of all works together, right? So, in chapter 25, we see that basically what happened is that David and his men hear about a guy named Nabal who is shearing his sheep. Now, there's actually quite a bit that goes into this. All right. So Nabal, he's got flocks of sheep. He has a wife named Abigail, a very beautiful woman, and David sends 10 of his men to go talk to Nabal while he's shearing the sheep. And what we find out is that at some point in time, while David is out in the wilderness and running from Saul, at some point in time, we know that he had some skirmishes with the Philistines, right? And that's what we talked about last week. And actually, I think it's chapter 24, but I believe it's chapter 23. But, in the city of Keilah, right? So David goes there and they fight against the Philistines and protect the city. Well, there were other times where there were skirmishes, just not all of them are recorded. And we see that what would happen sometimes, and this would make sense, that the Philistines, the soldiers there, if they came about a shepherd or any type of cattle or anything like that, and if they wanted it, they would just take it, because they're invading Israel and they're trying to overtake Israel. So they couldn't care less if this was, hey, just a little person with just a couple of sheep, or if they were a great big deal in the land and they had all these different sheep. They didn't care. They would just take them. But what we find out from what these young men come and talk to Nabal about is that while this was going on, David and his men actually protected Nabal's flock from the Philistines. They acted as, kind of this wall that would just protect them. And so when the Philistines would come and raid and take sheep and everything take the sheep and everything like that. And I remember when they were raiding Keilah, what were they robbing? They were robbing the threshing floor. So they were taking the wheat, the grain, they were taking food, they were taking livestock, they were doing all of those things. And so David is telling Nabal, hey, we protected your flocks, and you can ask your shepherds. You can ask your shepherds. We did not take a single thing from you. We did not take one single thing from you. And the whole reason why David is saying that, or sending these messengers, is because David is saying, now that you have gotten everything that is yours, and we did this for you, and now that you're harvesting the sheep, you're shearing the sheep, you're getting the wool, this is where you're getting paid, right? This is where you're making your money. Now that you have all of these things and that we've helped you, if you could give us something to help us out, we would appreciate it. And the way that they phrase it, they don't say, give us this much. They literally say, whatever you think or whatever you're willing to give to us, we'd be more than happy to take it, right? So David's essentially asking for help. He's in a position where he needs help. There's about 600 of them out there in the wilderness now. And so he just, hey, we did this for you. If you could help us out, that would be great. Now, of course, the story isn't that straightforward, because in verse 10, we see that Nabal answered David and said, or David's servants, and said, "Who is David?" Now, that's not a genuine question, all right? That's not a genuine question. It's going to be like listening to the TV over the neighbors mowing the lawn, all right? That's okay. We all have experience, too. We can make it through. So, Nabal is asking, who is David? Everyone knows who David is. David is famous. Everybody knows who David is. And so he says, who's David and who's Jesse? He's basically saying, I don't care who David is. He's a nobody. He means nothing to me. And then, now, even though he just asked who is David and who is Jesse, his follow-up question is this. Their follow-up statement is this: there be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Why would he say that? Well, because David was on the run from Saul, from the king, and everybody knew that. And so Nabal says, who's David? And then right away reveals that he knows exactly who David is, and he's trying to say, well, David's a runaway servant of the king, is basically what he's trying to say. That he's rebelled against the king, and that's why he's on the run right now. And so, all of this to say, and then let's do this, let's read verse 11. It says, shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So he's not just saying, no, we don't have anything to give at this time, or no, there isn't, it'd be too hard for us to do something like that. He is saying, I have plenty, but you won't get a single thing from me, because I don't care who you are. This is my stuff. It belongs to me. Oh, you helped me? The only reason why I have this stuff is because you protected all my flock and my herd, and without you, I would have nothing today. I would be destitute without anything. Well, too bad for you. Like, that was his attitude. And that's what he's telling these young men. So, those young men return to David, and they tell David everything that Nabal said. And so David says, all right, men, get your swords. And they get armed. And he says, we're going to Nabal's house, and Nabal's going to die. That was the plan. That's what they were going to do. Now, in all of this process, one way or another, Nabal's wife, Abigail, hears about all of this. Here's what Nabal said, what Nabal did, what David's plans are. I don't know how she knows all of this or hears all of this, but she hears about it. And so right away, she realized, oh boy, my husband made a boo-boo, all right? He made a mistake. So she calls the servants together. They get a whole bunch of food together. They get a whole bunch of wine together. They throw it on donkeys, and they ride out to meet David. And she presents all the food and the drinks to them, and she begs for mercy for her husband's life, for David to spare her husband. And so David, because of her actions and how she presented herself and the way that she humbled herself, David, he says to Abigail in verse 32, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me, and blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which has kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hast hasted and come to meet me, surely there had not been left any unto Nabal by the morning light. He basically says all the men that are there. So David received of her hand that which he brought him, and said unto her, go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. So, just so that we're on the same page here, Nabal offends David on purpose. He is offending him. He is trying to be rude. He is being discourteous. He is being selfish and greedy. Nabal, by all accounts, he has definitely done something wrong here, and he's definitely done something wrong against David here. So there's no doubt about that. Now David's response is, I'm going to kill Nabal, and I'm going to kill all the men of Nabal's house. I'm going to kill all of his servants. Now, the servants, you mean like the shepherds that your men protected? Those shepherds that were putting in a good word for you and for your men? I mean, those shepherds, they testified that David and his men did good by them and helped them and protected them. David's going to kill them all. Now, sometimes we get in the mindset that people are either good or bad. And because they're either good or bad, everything that they do, we filter through good or bad lens, right? But that's not realistic. The reality is that if we're going to call someone good or bad or lump them in the category, you can do that, but that doesn't mean that they don't do bad things. And now we know David obviously has done a couple of bad things in his life. We could go through, we could talk about Bathsheba, we're going to get to that here in a little bit when we get into 2 Samuel, but David's definitely made some mistakes. David has definitely done wrong in the sight of God. But we kind of look at those few things and think, oh, that's it. Well, remember, we just talked a couple weeks ago about how David loses his faith in God, and he makes this escape plan, and he goes out, he's lying to the priests and everything like that, and the result, the consequences of his lack of faith was that whole city of Nob was destroyed, and 85 of those priests died, and only Abiathar was able to escape. So David has more than just a couple of mistakes that he's made in his life, and by God's grace, God spares him from making another great mistake right here. Now that we've kind of established that, let's backtrack just a little bit here. What has happened in the last few chapters, right? So in verse 23, basically, the rest of that chapter, chapter 23, not verse 23, but in chapter 23, where we ended last week, basically here's how the rest of the chapter goes, right? They're in Keilah, they leave, and so Saul withholds from coming down to siege the city because David's no longer there. Well, word gets out where David is, and every single day Saul is pursuing David, every single day. And it finally gets to the point where David is actually trapped. It says at the end of chapter 23 that for Saul and his men come past David and his men round about to take them. So it was like game over. The noose was tightening, there was nowhere to go, and then a messenger runs up and says the Philistines are attacking. We have to go right now. And so Saul and his men have to leave David alone, and they have to go on their way. Well, chapter 24, we find that David's in the wilderness of En-Gedi, and in the strongholds that are there, and so different caves and stuff that are there. And so Saul goes to pursue David out there in the wilderness of En-Gedi. And in that time, David and his men are hiding. Some of his men are hiding inside this cave, among the sides of the cave. And nobody knows that they're in there. To put it mildly, Saul went in there to use the restroom. And while he was in there, David's men say the king is by himself, right? He's in there, it's a private moment, right? King's by himself. Here's your chance, David, take him out. And so what David does is David goes over and he cuts off a piece of his skirt, a piece of his robe. And as Saul leaves the cave, David waits for him to get a little bit of ways, and he comes out behind him and he calls out to Saul. And he reveals, Saul, look, I have a piece of your skirt. I could have killed you, but I didn't because I mean you no harm. I don't want to hurt you. I have no intention of causing harm to you at all. And this is proof of that. And Saul recognizes, my goodness, my life has just been spared. And David, his reasoning here, he says it's because let God judge between thee and me. Right? Verse 15 of chapter 24, the Lord therefore be judge and judge between me and thee, and see and plead my cause and deliver me out of thine hand. Do you know what David is saying here? David is making a statement that even though you have wronged me, and that much is clear, that much is obvious, everybody knows it, Saul knows it, he won't say it out loud, right? They keep trying to talk about how David is this wicked enemy, blah, blah, blah. But no, he knows it. David has done nothing wrong. But David has come to the conclusion that I will not be the one to avenge myself. I'm going to let God handle that. Because God is the one who knows exactly what's happening. He sees the heart, right? You remember, how did David even become anointed as the king? Well, it's because man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh upon the heart. And so David knows that more than anybody, and he's applying that line of reasoning, even with Saul, who is his sworn enemy, who has been chasing him every single day, who has been trying to kill him at every single opportunity. And David, in that time, as a man who has he's a man who's after God's own heart, a man who is being Christ-minded, we could even say. That's right, he's in the Old Testament, he's being Christ-minded, right? He's saying, I will not hurt you. I will let God handle this situation. God is the one who's in control, and I'm going to let him take care of it. And of course, we know that this, essentially, Saul just melts into a puddle. And he just starts crying, like, you're right. It's the weirdest thing, because it says in verse 16 of chapter 24 that after David said these things, right, unto Saul, Saul said, is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. It's almost like he was, like, out of his mind. It was almost like he was insane. Like he just woke up from a dream. You know, is that you, David? Who's been talking to me this whole time? And so, then of course we see that Saul basically says, I'm sorry, I'll leave you alone, and he leaves. And so David and his men, they go back into the caves there at En-Gedi, and they dwell there. And that's when we come across this whole passage here. Now I should throw this in there too, that in chapter 25 that Samuel died. All right, very first verse of chapter 25, Samuel died. And so that way, if you're trying to follow the storyline, you're like, wait a second, what happened to Samuel? Well, he did pass away. And so that happens at the first part of chapter 25. It says the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And so this is where he comes into contact with Nabal and with Abigail, and that whole entire situation happens. So now that we've kind of recapped and talked about how he handled that situation with Saul, how is he handling this situation with Nabal? Saul's been trying to kill him every single day. Every single day, Saul's been pursuing him, chasing him, doing everything he can to save him, and only by the grace of God has David escaped, just barely, on multiple occasions. And David spares Saul and says, let God be the one to deal with vengeance here. But then Nabal says mean words, and David says, let's kill him. Do you see that these are not the same thing? Do you see how David handled one situation, and we would look at that and say, that's an incredible testimony. What a godly man to handle it that way. But then you look at this other situation, you're like, who's this David? What's he doing right now? That doesn't sound like a man after God's own heart. That sounds like a tyrant, right? You said something rude to me. You said something mean to me. I'm going to take my army down here, and I'm going to kill you. And I'm going to kill all the people in your house. All the people that showed kindness to us. All the people that we helped before. We're going to kill them all. That doesn't sound right. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, that just sounds like these are not the same person. But it is the same person. And so, just like David humbled himself to Saul in that manner, and it completely melted Saul and his demeanor and his countenance and changed him, Abigail plays that role in David's life in this passage. She comes out, she serves him, she bows down to him, makes herself subservient. They bring all these provisions for David and his men, and she begs for mercy. And it doesn't say it in detail here, but clearly, I mean, these are two events that are very close in nature. I don't think that there was a disconnect in David's mind between these things. And David even says that God used her to keep him from avenging himself with his own hand. So here's what we need to recognize from this very large chunk of scripture, really. I mean, we're talking about a 2.5 chapter, passage here that I've kind of recapped and everything. Here's what we should realize. It's that we should let God take care of vengeance. All right? You could almost say that until now, this whole entire time has just been an introduction. All right? We should let God take care of vengeance. Now, I see some of you nervous smiles when I say something like that. Don't worry, we're more than halfway done, so it's okay. All right? You can breathe easy, all right? So I'll take a deep breath together. It's okay. All right. We should let God take care of vengeance. David knew that. But in a moment of rage, at a time, I don't know the situation. I don't know if it's because he was exhausted. They were clearly hungry, just in that particular time because Samuel just died. Make no mistake, David loves Samuel. Right? There is a relationship there. Samuel just died. He's starving. He's exhausted. They're still out on the run. And then this guy says this. David, he just kind of has this knee-jerk reaction. And he's going to go and take care of business by himself. Well, as Christians, I know that there is this, I shouldn't even say as Christians, as Americans, we have this sense about us that if somebody is going to do something against us or that we don't like, that we will take action. We're going to take action. We're going to do something about it. We're going to take a stand. And I will say that there are times where that is appropriate. There are times where that makes sense. There are times where we have gotten involved in certain situations that didn't necessarily have a direct impact on us. They might have an indirect impact on us later down the road or something like that. But we got involved directly in situations because we believed that this was something that would be better for the global stage. We were kind of acting as the world's policeman. We saw something, hey, this is wrong. We have an opportunity to get involved, so we're going to go ahead and get involved. Things like that. Standing up for somebody who's getting bullied. I don't know if you ever remember, like in school, you ever see someone getting bullied? Like, wasn't there something inside of you that like welled up? Like, this isn't right. Like, I've got to do something about this. Stuff like that. I'm not saying that standing up for yourself and all that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But what I am saying is that when you feel like somebody has wronged you, what you can do is you can dwell on that. And you can start thinking about that and obsessing over that. And finally, you get to a place where that's all you're thinking about. And all you want to do is pay them back in some way. And so you take action into your own hands. Because really, think about it. What did Nabal do to David? He insulted him. That was it. Killing Nabal and all his men, is that an appropriate response to being insulted? Absolutely not. There's nothing justified with that. So I want to read to you a couple of verses out of Romans chapter 12. Now, when I was candidating, I actually preached out of this passage, preached this sermon, but starting in verse 18 through the end of the chapter, I just read it to you. It says, "If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." And so, what it literally is saying here, when it's talking about heaping coals of fire on his head, or I should say what it's figuratively saying, what it's literally saying is, you dump hot coals on their head, and of course that would be not very pleasant for them. Now, if they're your enemy, it might be pleasant for you to do that to them, but Paul is not actually prescribing physical punishment for them, okay? This is a figure of speech. Here's what it means. The idea is that when you have been wrong, right, in verse 21 it says, "Be not overcome with evil," that means It's not like this weird, like, I'm an evil person because evil has overcome me now. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about evil has been done to you. All right, so someone has purposely done something against you on an individual level, on purpose, and you're dwelling on it, and you're being overcome with it because you can't stop thinking about it, right? So it could even be, it's even in this room right now, you might be holding on to something that somebody did to you a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe a month ago. I don't know what it is, but you're dwelling on that and you're just so angry and frustrated. And it's actually shaped the course of your life because you're thinking about that one thing. You know, I'm very careful whenever I talk about like psychologists and stuff like that because I think a lot of that stuff is nonsense. All right, a lot of that stuff is just absolute nonsense. Now, some of it I think is based in truth. I think some of it lines up with what we learn in the Bible. But you know, we can talk about in Hebrews root of bitterness. And do you know what it is when you dwell on a wrongdoing, when you're overcome with evil? That's called becoming bitter. And here's what that looks like. It's in people's lives. Well, you know, when I was in 3rd grade, I had to do a project in front of the class. And I was speaking in front of the class, and I tripped up on my words, and everyone laughed at me. And I was really, really embarrassed, and I hurt my feelings. So now, for the rest of my life, I will not do any public speaking whatsoever. Completely avoiding any public speaking. And there's people who truly, that is exactly their testimony. Something bad happened to me when I was a little kid, and now for the rest of my life, I will never do anything like this. Now, that's not healthy. That's not good for you. That's a root of bitterness. You're upset at these children for being children, even though you were a child at the time. And it might even be something more serious than that, where it is true, something wrong has happened to you, but you can't hold on to that. You can't let it be a root of bitterness. You can't let it overcome you. Because what Paul tells us in verse 20, he said that if you treat your enemy well, if you feed him when he hungers, if he's thirsty and you give him something to drink, it says, and so thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. What that means is that contradiction in your relationship where they hate you, they're your enemy, and you're treating them nicely, it's going to basically melt their brain. Like it's going to completely blow their mind. Like they're not going to get it. They're not going to understand it. It's not going to make sense to them. And at the end of 21, he says, but overcome evil with good. Here's what it is. This is like spiritual judo is what this is, right? Someone does something evil to you, and you do your spiritual judo, you do something nice to them. So instead now of you being overcome with evil, where all you can think about is all the wicked things that they've done to you, and you've got this root of bitterness, and you're harboring this hate for them, and you just can't wait to get back at them. Instead of that happening, now what's happened is your enemy can't stop thinking about the good that you did for them. They can't. Can I tell you guys a funny story from when I was a kid? Always, right? We had this juniper bush, big juniper bush. There was a couple of them out in front of our house. And, probably right now, if we were to like take that thing out and rip it out of the ground, we'd probably find 30 baseballs in there, all right? Because it's prickly, and there's all these big spiders on it and stuff. So a little kid, we lost a ball in there. We couldn't really see where it was. It was gone, all right? We weren't gonna find it. Now, the cool thing about this juniper bush was that the middle of it, like I said, there was a couple of them, but the middle section of it up against the fence had been hollowed out and a transformer was put there, those big green boxes, right? And so we found that there's a certain way you can climb on the juniper bush and jump down onto this transformer and be in this like cave, of trees. And you can see out pretty good out into the road right in front of you. And so me and my buddies, that was like our secret hideout. And it was cool because, Washington, it rains a lot and it's cold. And so you're in here, you're getting some pretty good cover. And that transformer was pretty warm actually. So even on a cold day, you could just kind of hug this, 50,000 volt box and you were good, And I had to get a 6th toe removed a couple years ago, but I don't know, I was kidding. So I don't know, there might be some long-term damage from that, but that was our little hideout. Well, these punks in the neighborhood found out about our hideout. Do you know what they did? They raided our base and took all the cool stuff that we had put in there. Some random scraps of like construction material that my dad had left that he wasn't using, but we were using it pretending like it was like robot stuff. We had these metal wires that we were attaching to 9-volt batteries to make an electric fence, and it never worked, but it was a really cool idea. And so what we did was, so we started having this feud with these kids in the neighborhood, and we did not get along at all. We didn't like each other. And so, all right, I'm about to make a real deep admission here. I saw one of them riding down the street one day in a different part of the neighborhood, and I hid in the bushes. And when he came by, I jumped out like a crazy man and scared him so bad that he crashed his bike. And he was on the ground, like eyes like wide open. He's all bleeding and everything like that, and he's hurt, and he thinks like I'm about to just like stab him, I was 4th grade, I was a savage, all right? And so I'm standing over him, and he's bleeding and all this stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't feel right about this. I don't think I could just like punch him in the face, but I wanted to. I'm just being honest. I wasn't safe either, so don't give me those judgmental looks. I wasn't safe, okay? So I figured, I have a way to get back at him. What do you put on cuts that doesn't feel very good? Some hydrogen peroxide. And so I thought, this is what I'll do. I said, hey, I'll be right back. I'll get you a Band-Aid and something to clean that with. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, just stay right here. And so I went back to my house, and I got the hydrogen peroxide, and I got a Band-Aid and some toilet paper, and I came back out there, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get him real good. And so he puts up his arm, he was his nasty, big thing all down the back of his arm, and I'm spraying the hydrogen peroxide on there, and it's all bubbling and fizzing, and he's like, oh, he's like screaming, and I'm like, yes, ha 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 ha, take this. And then his mom pulls up. And I didn't realize it was his mom. I didn't even know a car pulled up until I heard, oh my goodness, honey, baby, are you okay? And I'm just like, uh-oh, busted. And so I'm thinking, I'm getting myself geared now. I'm like, okay, the mom's gonna yell at me, maybe I can kick her car and run away, just a little punk. And you know what his mom did? The nerve of this woman. She thanked me for taking care of her son. And she was like, you are such a good friend. I can't believe that you're doing this. And the kids are really, no, but mom, what? And she's like, be quiet, he's helping you out. And I'm over there like, that's right, I am helping you out. And because of her demeanor and how she reacted to all of this stuff now, I don't think she's an idiot. I'm pretty sure that he probably said something. There's these guys from the neighborhood that live over here, we're not getting along with them, and this is what they look like, yada, yada, yada. But I think that in her wisdom, her motherly wisdom, she saw an opportunity to bridge a gap. And so she began treating me very kindly. And by the time she left, she had invited me to come over to their house and spend some time with them. And so I went over there, we had snacks, drank some Capri Suns, played some Nintendo together, and when we left, everything was good. And look, I don't remember every single interaction, and I got a lot of fights when I was a kid. I don't even remember all of them. I remember that one though. Like that actually affected me. By her not taking vengeance out on me, but showing kindness and mercy. I mean, she was in a position there, like, did you do this to my son? I mean, she could have really ripped me up, found out where I lived, talked to my parents, and I would have been in real big trouble, but she didn't. And it really affected me. I remember the thoughts and feelings that were going through my mind during all of that because of how she handled it. You know that we have opportunities sometimes to take vengeance in our own hand. and it really seems like this is going to be satisfying, or this is going to be good. But Paul reminds us in verse 19. He says, "Avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath." And then, of course, we know the famous part of the verse, "For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." We all remember that. That's the famous part of the verse. But I really think the central part of it is this: give place unto wrath. If we are the ones who are taking vengeance for ourselves, do you know what we're doing? We're cutting God out of the equation. We're not leaving place for wrath. We're not leaving a place for God to do his work. Now here's why that's important. Because God is sovereign and God is omniscient and he knows everything. So if God takes action, if God sends his wrath against somebody who has wronged you in some way, you can say that it was just and it was right. But how many of us, how many times have we gotten so angry, so upset at somebody, and we've actually taken action, whether it be by yelling at them or doing something to them, and then we find out later that we were mistaken, that we misunderstood the whole entire situation? What if David would have just found out that, I'll just throw something out, that Nabal's son had just died that day? Or what if Nabal had just been taken advantage of by some Philistines who said almost the exact same thing to him, and so he was on edge already? I mean, what if? Did David know those things? He didn't know any of that. The only thing he knew is that he asked Nabal for some help, and Nabal spit in his face, so to speak. That's all that he knew. He didn't know why, he didn't know the situation. So here he goes to take wrath out on him, and by God's intervention, through his wife Abigail, David doesn't do anything. But then we find out this: because David gave place unto wrath, he left room for God to do something. What happens at the end of chapter 25? It says that in verse 38, it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, that he died. The Lord smote Nabal, that he died, not David. If David would have smote Nabal, you can't say, well, the Lord did it, so it would have been okay. No, it would have been wrong. It would not have been justified. But since the Lord did it, it was right, and it was righteous, and it was the right thing to do. Listen, here's where this is all coming down to, and I hope that you've probably seen this, been seeing this kind of narrow down to this point. In your life, as frustrating as it might be to not take action, to not avenge yourself, to not stick it to somebody through word or through deed when you have that opportunity to do so, as much as that can frustrate you and you just feel like, you ever feel like you're biting your tongue and you feel like you're about to explode, like you have to say something, right? And if you're married in here tonight, don't lie, chicken. You've been there, all right? All right. Maybe even on the car ride to church, let's be honest. It happens. It happens. You're just so upset and so angry that you're going to say those things because your intent is to punish the other person. You're going to do something. You're going to take certain action or neglect to do something, all for the sake of avenging yourself. But now, you've not given place unto wrath. And now you've removed God out of the equation. Once again, I'm not suggesting by any means someone comes into your house and is robbing your family that you say, oh, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I'll just let him go ahead and ransack the house, and if he kills the kids, oh, God's in control. That's a foolish mindset, and I'm not suggesting that whatsoever. But what I'm saying is when someone's wronged you, don't spend a single moment plotting your revenge. Don't spend a single moment dwelling on it and thinking about it. As a matter of fact, here's what we should do. Here's what we should do. I've been doing homework assignments lately, right? I got a homework assignment for you tonight. All right? It's not going to be an invitation. It's just going to be this right here. There's somebody in your life that you're upset with, that you've been harboring some frustration towards them. It doesn't matter if it's been a couple of months, a couple of years, your whole entire life. First of all, pray to God, ask God to forgive you for doing that. Because harboring that's not right. That is a sin to do that. So pray to God, ask for His forgiveness, for His mercy to cleanse you of that. And then go to that person and make it right. What does it say in Matthew 18? It says that if someone's offended you go to them. You don't just sit back and try to throw out passive-aggressive signals and hope that they pick up on it, and that eventually they'll come and talk to you and be like, hey, I noticed that, for Christmas this year, when you're sending out the family Christmas cards, on mine, you kind of left this vague note, said something like, die scum, and I thought, well, that seems a little odd. Don't be passive-aggressive. Don't sit there and say, well, if they really, were a good person, then they would know that they did this to me. You'd be surprised how many times you go and talk to somebody and you bring up something that they did or said and they offended you, that offended you, and they'll look at you with eyes like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Or even, I've experienced this as well, where I've talked to people and they were like, I knew that you were upset with me, but I thought it was because of this thing over here. I had no idea that when I made this joke or something like that, that was offensive to you. Do you know when I really struggled with this a lot? Was when my dad passed away. Because when my dad passed away, you hear people here and there, they're talking about jokes, and they're joking about funerals, and they're joking about, dads and stuff like that. And my flesh says, how dare they talk about those kinds of things? Don't they know that my dad just died? And then, very quickly, I also had the thought, I think it was more like God convicted me. Well, one, maybe they don't know that your dad died. And two, even if they did, their life does not revolve around your life. So why are you expecting them to change everything that they say and do so that you'll be comfortable? They're not thinking about you 24 hours a day like you're thinking about yourself right now. Like that's what I started realizing. And I got over it. I was like, you know what? I'm being dumb right now. And just a few weeks ago, I had to get a hold of somebody. And I had to say, hey, I want you to know that I've been a little upset with you for a few months now, and I'm really sorry. And now that I think back about the situation, it was really my fault because I said something that was, I didn't think was a big deal, but apparently it was offensive. And because since I didn't think it was a big deal, I was basically offended that you were offended, And I had to apologize for that. I said, hey, I won't joke about something like that anymore, and I'll make sure to be careful around you guys and stuff like that. And you know what they did? They came back and said, don't ever talk to me. No, they were just like, dude, I'm so glad that you said that. We haven't really thought about it too much, but, So here's something that I was harboring in my heart and I was all upset about. They didn't really think about it. So there's your homework. Pray, ask God to forgive you. Call that person. Now, it's not your responsibility to make them be your best friend and be like water under the bridge on their end. You can't control what they do. But I will say that, 75, 80% of the time, you're going to find out that people are going to actually be a lot more gracious than you realize. And if you come out and humble yourself and present that situation to them and make effort to patch things up, you're going to find out most of the time they'll do it. And on those occasions where they still say, you know what, I don't care what you say. I still think you're a jerk and I still don't want to talk to you. Well, you can walk away from that thing and say, hey, that's all right. I've already forgiven them. It's not on my mind anymore. I'm going to go to bed and sleep like a baby tonight. Because I'm going to cry myself to sleep and wake up every 30 minutes if you're Malachi, right? But I'm not going to worry about it anymore. And do you know what you're doing when you do that? You're giving place under wrath. Because that way, if really what they're doing is that wicked, God will know and God will handle it. So think about that tonight. Let God avenge you. Let God take care of those things. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray. Like I said, we're not going to do a normal invitation because I gave you your homework. But we're going to pray, and I hope that while we're praying, one, that you're thinking about that situation and asking the Lord to forgive you for it, but also that you start making plans about how you're going to contact them. And if I can give you just one piece of practical personal advice, when you write that text out, you can do it. You can text them if you want. When you either write that text out or go to hit dial to call them, you're going to get really scared. I'm just going to let you know. At least I have, in my experience. You're going to get terrified. And you're going to try and convince yourself, well, they don't care anyways. This isn't going to fix anything. Don't believe that. That's the devil. Don't believe that. Push through that. And if you do that, I think that you will be so shocked to find out, one, how God uses that to be a blessing in your life, and two, how God uses that to help you get over some bitterness and some fears that you've had in your life. Might even free you up to do some things that you haven't been doing because of these past hurts. So pray about that tonight as we pray together in closing.